This is part 2 of the Carl Jung and Dark Night of the Soul series. In my previous video, I summarized the Dark Night of the Soul experience and provided highly practical steps to getting through the Dark Night of the Soul. Over 450,000 people have watched that video, and many people commented about their struggles in life and about the difficulties that they are going through. So feel free to comment with your experiences, as it has been helpful for the community having people share what they've been through. It is helpful to know that others are going through this as well, and that there seems to be some answers out there. In this video, I'm going to dive deep into Carl Jung's work and highlight what he says about the Dark Night of the Soul. This means we are going to get into understanding the psychological significance of alchemy, its stages and symbolism, but just at a beginner's level, so it is easy to understand. So you're in for a wild ride. And ultimately, this is going to help you to weather the storm through your failures, through your difficulties and disappointments in life. When we find ourselves in the dark moments, we need a light, and that light comes from becoming more conscious. Before we go any further, I have to share this warning from Jung when he says, young people who are very far from knowing who they really are would run a great risk if they obscured their knowledge of themselves still further by letting the dark night of the soul pour into their immature, labile consciousness. Here, a certain depreciation of the unconscious is justified. Experience has convinced me that there are not only different temperaments, types, but different stages of psychological development, so that one can well say that there is an essential difference between the psychology of the first and the second half of life. With that said, if you are still willing to proceed, let us begin our exploration. The 4 stages of transmutation in alchemy describe the transformative process of the prima materia in order to create the philosopher's stone. This is known as the great work, or in Latin, as the magnum opus. Psychologically, this corresponds with the process of individuation, which includes a greater awareness of your own wholeness and a realization of your true personality. The 4 stages of alchemy are the Nigredo, albedo, citrinitis, and rubedo. And in some alchemical systems, these 4 stages are shortened to 3 stages, with the last 2 stages becoming 1. So there are different representations of this alchemical process. The Dark Night of the Soul, according to Carl Jung, corresponds with the alchemical stage of the Nigredo. We can see this when Jung says, "It is not immediately apparent why this dark state deserves special praise, since the Nigredo is universally held to be of a somber and melancholy humor reminiscent of death and the grave. But the fact that medieval alchemy had connections with the mysticism of the age, or rather was itself a form of mysticism, allows us to adduce as a parallel to the Nigredo the writings of St. John of the Cross concerning the Dark Night. This author conceives the spiritual night of the soul as a supremely positive state in which the invisible, and therefore dark, radiance of God comes to pierce and purify the soul. Jung also links the Dark Night of the Soul with the process of individuation when he says, in very different language, St. John of the Cross has made the same problem more readily accessible to the Westerner in his account of the Dark Night of the Soul. That we find it needful to draw analogies from psychopathology and from both Eastern and Western mysticism is only to be expected. The individuation process is, psychically, a borderline phenomenon which needs special conditions in order to become conscious. So we can understand now that the beginning of the process of individuation corresponds with the alchemical stage of the Nigredo, which is further illustrated by St. John of the Cross in his account of the dark night of the soul. In understanding that the dark night of the soul is the equivalent of the Nigredo in alchemy, we can look at what Jung says about the Nigredo and gain insight into how to complete this stage of individuation. So this is going to help you get through the dark night of the soul and get to the next stage of the alchemical process, which means you can continue your individuation and reach higher levels of development. So Jung gives commentary on these alchemical images. He outlines how these images help depict the Nigredo process, and then he goes on to describe the psychological significance, which we will talk about later. For now, let's explore the Nigredo process, where Jung says, "This curious separation or union of the figures occurs several times in the manuscript. In the next picture on page 331, the king on the left has a blue robe and a black foot, and the one on the right has a black robe and a blue foot. Both the scepters are red. The inscription runs, 'Thus is it done that what was hid may be revealed.'" This refers, as the preceding text makes clear, to the Nigredo, which is about to ensue. The Nigredo signifies the mortificatio, putrefactio, solutio, separatio, divisio, etc., a state of dissolution and decomposition that precedes the synthesis. This picture is followed by one showing the two figures separated, each with 2 feet. The idea here is that the Nigredo process is one where there is a separation taking place between substances. The alchemical images depict 2 men in one body, and then in the next image, Jung says the men are separated into 2 bodies. In the process of the Nigredo, the first procedure is called calcination, where the alchemist gently heats the materials. During this procedure, the mercury separates from the sulfur for the first time. After this, the elements are recombined and the mercury breaks down the matter into solution. This is the mortification and putrefaction, where the sulfurous impurities of the base matter are released. The mortification is the stripping down process, and the putrefaction returns the material to a solution or state of chaos. The putrefaction stage is also known as the return to the mother, because it is the necessary preparation for the rebirth of the spirit in its first state of purification. The darkness of the substance in this stage is often represented in alchemical texts by a black sun, also known as soul niger. This results in a return to chaos symbolized by blackness, which is the Nigredo, or what the alchemists refer to as the raven's head. Jung goes on to comment on another alchemical image in the series, where he says, "The figure on the left wears the spiritual crown, and the one on the right the temporal, corresponding to the occult, spiritual, and earthly corporeal nature of sulfur. The figure on the left wears a robe whose right half is blue and the left black, the one on the right the reverse. They thus complement one another." The text explains, "The colors of the 9th year and a half this month of January 1772 are represented by these 2 figures. Likewise, the mortification of our natural mercurius and of the dead water reduced to another form." The inscription under the picture runs, "A very long time, and by putrefaction, calcination, incineration, fixation, and coagulation, the materials become solid, but this comes to pass naturally after a very long time. This probably refers to the completion of the Nigredo after a period of pregnancy, i.e., to the complete separation of the mercurius or the two sulfurs, or of their bodily and spiritual natures, corresponding to Dawn's extraction of the soul from the body and the production of the unio mentalis. According to the picture, the one figure, as regards its colors, is the mirror image of the other. This indicates a relationship of complementarity between physis and spirit, so that the one reflects the other. That too is probably the meaning of the manifestation of the hidden. Through the unio mentalis, that which is hidden in physis by projection is made conscious. In the Nigredo, the dark night of the soul, the psychic contents free themselves from their attachment to the body, and the nature and meaning of this connection are recognized. This is what my first video on the dark night of the soul focused on. This idea of gaining insight from your detachment from a situation you were absorbed within. This can cover many situations. You could have been absorbed in a particular relationship, a work situation, or following a particular belief you had, and something happens where you are now detached from that situation. These types of experiences provide the preconditions that can lead one into the dark night of the soul, which is described here as the soul leaving the body or the separation of substances. In the prior quote from Jung, we can learn that one discovers what is hidden in their own projections. So when you separate from the situation, you pull back your projections and you learn about your psychic connection or relation to your prior situation. For example, if your relationship has ended with someone, you now have a chance to pull back those projections you had previously put onto the other person. And in doing so, you now see more clearly how you were being emotional about a particular situation you had with them. You begin to make a clear-headed assessment of how you acted and how you saw them, because your mind is now in a state that is detached from the situation, and you can better see how your emotions or feelings were keeping you from seeing the situation clearly when you were in it. The dark night of the soul is not only a detachment, a separation from a situation, which is allegorized as the body, but it affords you the opportunity of purification from that former state of being. And if navigated correctly, it enables you to gain immense insight about yourself and your situation in life. It is also what enables you to pull back the projections, which is an aspect of your shadow cast onto other people, making you see them in a particular way. We can see the importance of the development of the unio mentalis when Jung says, the goal of the procedure is the unio mentalis, the attainment of full knowledge of the heights and depths of one's own character. If the demand for self-knowledge is willed by fate and is refused, this negative attitude may end in real death. The demand would not have come to this person had he still been able to strike out on some promising bypath, but he is caught in a blind alley from which only self-knowledge can extricate him. If he refuses this, then no other way is open to him. Usually he is not conscious of his situation either, and the more unconscious he is, the more he is at the mercy of unforeseen dangers. He cannot get out of the way of a car quickly enough. In climbing a mountain, he misses his foothold somewhere. Out skiing, he thinks he can just negotiate a tricky slope, and in an illness, he suddenly loses the courage to live. The unconscious has 1,000 ways of snuffing out a meaningless existence with surprising swiftness. The connection of the unio mentalis with the death motif is therefore obvious, even when death consists only in the cessation of spiritual progress. This warning from Jung emphasizes the importance of heeding the call of developing self-knowledge. This means that if you don't develop the unio mentalis, which I'll explain more later, then according to Jung, you put yourself at risk of actual death, or at a minimum, the cessation of spiritual or psychological progress. So you'll be stuck in your problems, unable to sort through your shadow, and you'll continue to suffer in situation after situation. That's why approaching the attainment of self-knowledge is so important. And the development of the unio mentalis is what enables you to gain that self-knowledge. So let's dig deeper into what this mental union called the unio mentalis actually is. Let's explore this through the following quote by Jung, where he says, "This may begin with a purely intrapsychic unio mentalis of intellect or reason with eros, representing feeling. Such an interior operation means a great deal, since it brings a considerable increase of self-knowledge as well as of personal maturity, but its reality is merely potential and is validated only by a union with the physical world of the body." We can see here that the development of the unio mentalis is an intrapsychic union of your intellect with your feelings. It is this union of opposites which increases self-knowledge and helps you develop personal maturity. The insights are then meant to be actually put into practice, which we will talk about later. For now, I want to focus you on understanding the psychodynamics that are in operation here. And these next quotes by Jung tie it all together, where he says, "The original half-animal state of unconsciousness was known to the adept as the Nigredo, the chaos, the massa confusa, an inextricable interweaving of the soul with the body, which together formed a dark unity, the unio naturalis. From this enchainment, he had to free the soul by means of separatio, and establish a spiritual psychic counterposition, conscious and rational insight, which would prove immune to the influences of the body. But such insight, as we have seen, is possible only if the delusory projections that veil the reality of things can be withdrawn. The unconscious identity with the object then ceases, and the soul is freed from its fetters in the things of sense. The psychologist is very well acquainted with this process, for a very important part of his psychotherapeutic work consists in making conscious and dissolving the projections that falsify the patient's view of the world and impede his self-knowledge. He does this in order to bring anomalous psychic states of an affective nature, i.e. neurotic symptoms, under the control of consciousness. The declared aim of the treatment is to set up a rational, spiritual psychic position over against the turbulence of the emotions. Expressed in the language of the Hermetic philosophy, the ego personality's coming to terms with its own background, the shadow, corresponds to the union of spirit and soul in the unio mentalis, which is the first stage of the conjunctio. What I call coming to terms with the unconscious, the alchemists call meditation. We can see from this the two states. The first state is the unio naturalis, which is where the soul is in a so-called dark unity with a corrupt body. This resembles your failed situation in life, whatever it may be, where you are stuck in your projections, have not yet integrated your shadow, and are in need of a self-knowledge to get out of your situation and to stop yourself from falling back into the same patterns throughout your life and repeating these same mistakes. You then fall into chaos, but in that darkness, your soul, which is your feeling, is separated from the body, which is your situation in the world. You are now experiencing the dark night of the soul. To get out of it, you are in need of insight and self-knowledge. To gain this insight, you need to develop the unio mentalis, which is the second state, which is the union of the spirit and the soul, or your rationality with your feelings. This creates a psychic counterposition, helping you free your feelings from your situation, helping you observe the objective situation, and helping you to undergo critical introspection. So your soul is now fused with the spirit. Your feelings are now in union with your rational insight. This is the development of the unio mentalis, and this is the first stage that helps you get through the dark night of the soul. We conclude that meditative philosophy consists in the overcoming of the body by mental union, unio mentalis. This first union does not as yet make the wise man, but only the mental discipline of wisdom. It is significant for the whole of alchemy that in Dawn's view, a mental union was not the culminating point, but merely the first stage of the procedure. The second stage is reached when the mental union, that is, the union of the spirit and soul, is conjoined with the body. The second step on the way to the production of this substance was the reunion of the spirit with the body. For this procedure, there were many symbols. One of the most important was the alchemical marriage, which took place in the retort. The second stage of the conjunction, the reuniting of the unio mentalis with the body, is particularly important, as only from here can the complete conjunction be attained. Union with the unus mundus. The reuniting of the spiritual position with the body obviously means that the insights gained should be made real. An insight might just as well remain in abeyance if it is simply not used. The second stage of conjunction, therefore, consists in making a reality of the man who has acquired some knowledge of his paradoxical wholeness. The second stage is where you are moving beyond the dark night of the soul, and you are now integrating all that you have learned from that experience into your life. You have gained insights through the union of your thinking and feeling, your spirit and soul, the logos and eros. You are now acting upon and living out those insights in reality. You are allowing what you have learned to integrate into your personality so that you can actually become a wise person. You are bringing the conjunction of the opposites within you and what that produces into reality. This is not only how you become wise and live a life of wisdom, but it is also how you become extraordinarily powerful, because the tension of the opposites within you gives rise to a creative energy or power. And obviously, this is powerful because the unconscious libido is now flowing into consciousness, and that energy is helping you to actually live a wise life. So your capacity to live a wise life is always dependent on that connection to the unconscious. This is the idea of the psychodynamics of the mind. The relation between different aspects of yourself have to be maintained. However, because you are attempting to unite opposing factors within yourself, or what Jung referred to as acquiring some knowledge of your paradoxical wholeness, you are only going to be able to maintain this union of opposites through what Jung referred to as a symbol. As the unconscious seeks to express paradoxical unions of opposites through abstract inner symbols, you can think of symbols as the language of the unconscious, but they are much more than just messages for mere communication. They are living symbols of psychic unconscious energy that represent and mediate inner transformations. Symbols form a part of our inner reality and phenomenology. So that's why Jung said that one of the most important symbols for this second stage of transformation was the alchemical marriage, which took place in the retort. The retort, I had to look it up, in this context, is a furnace. The profound observation is that a marriage is a union between opposites, and this inner symbol also literally performs that function of uniting the opposites. In a practical sense, you may find these symbols present in your dreams, or in other meditative states where you have a greater access to unconscious contents. It's worth noting that truly religious symbology that we see represented in art or expressed outwardly are projections of that inner image found within. So many of these religious symbols you see were derived from within. They weren't consciously constructed. If you practice keeping your dream journal and you meditate or you do any of the other things known to access the unconscious, you'll observe these inner images as facts of the psyche. Just as you look outwardly and see such and such a thing as a fact in the world, you will also look inwardly and see these images as facts. Now, I know this may be difficult for some people to understand, and I can only say from experience that the more you are open to uncovering these inner experiences, the more likely you will have them. Seek and keep seeking, and you will find. Now, I want to bring your attention back to a specific point Jung made in an earlier quote. He said, the second stage of conjunction, the reuniting of the unio mentalis with the body, is particularly important, as only from here can the complete conjunction be attained, union with the unus mundus. And in a similar passage, Jung reinforces this point when he says, but a consummation of the mysterium coniunctionis can be expected only when the unity of spirit, soul, and body is made one with the original unus mundus. So what is the unus mundus? The unus mundus, Jung says, is the original, non-differentiated unity of the world or of being, the primordial unconscious. And this next quote gives us some more detail to understand what the unus mundus means when Jung says, the one and simple is what Dawn called the unus mundus. This one world was the res simplex. For him, the third and highest degree of conjunction was the union with the whole man with the unus mundus. By this, he meant, as we have seen, the potential world of the first day of creation when nothing was yet in actu, i.e., divided into two and many, but was still one. The creation of unity by a magical procedure meant the possibility of effecting a union with the world, not with the world of multiplicity as we see it, but with a potential world, the eternal ground of all empirical being, just as the self is the ground and origin of the individual personality, past, present, and future. On the basis of a self known by meditation and produced by alchemical means, Dawn hoped and expected to be united with the unus mundus. So obviously, the goal is the unity with the unus mundus. But I want to point something out that Jung said. The reuniting with the unio mentalis with the body is particularly important, as it is only from here that the complete conjunction can be attained. Now, this is very curious, as there has to be some link that makes some kind of sense that would enable one to go from reuniting the unio mentalis with the body to then going on and uniting with the unus mundus. We have a hint at this link when Jung says, for a man of those times, there was no intellectual difficulty in postulating a truth which was the same in God, in man, and in matter. With the help of this idea, he could see at once that the reconciliation of hostile elements and the union of alchemical opposites formed a correspondence to the unio mentalis which took place simultaneously in the mind of man, and not only in man, but in God, that he may be one in all. Dawn correctly recognized that the entity in which the union took place is the psychological authority which I have called the self. There we have it. The process of uniting the opposites within yourself corresponds with the unio mentalis taking place in God, or in the archetype of wholeness, or the self. Through alchemy and meditation, one is said to be able to gain knowledge of the self. This is evident when Jung says, the unio mentalis then, in psychological as well as in alchemical language, means knowledge of oneself. In contradistinction to the modern prejudice that self-knowledge is nothing but a knowledge of the ego, the alchemists regarded the self as a substance incommensurable with the ego, hidden in the body, and identical with the image of God.